Welcome back to the Humble Rising podcast. I am your host, Adi Vargas, and I have a very special episode for you today. When I came across Bizzie Gold's work, something in me knew I had to have her on the show. And something in me knew that her work is disruptive in the most necessary way possible. Her clarity, her boldness. She is entirely data driven, which I have a strong appreciation for. And she has this refusal to conform to the traditional mold of what mental health support should look like. And her take is refreshing. And so I had to have her on. She's really a pioneer, I believe, in the mental health world. She's the founder of Break Method, which is a data-driven system that uses behavior prediction and emotional rewiring to help people break free from self-deception and transform their lives. Now, over the last 11 years, she's mapped tens of thousands of data sets to uncover something really striking and profound, which is that our subconscious behavior patterns are predictable. And most importantly, they are changeable. Her work bridges neuroscience, which I love, behavior strategy, love, and data analytics. Oh, the triple whammy to offer real, measurable outcomes without relying on years of talk therapy or subjective storytelling. She's worked with everyone from high-level leaders to therapists and families and entrepreneurs. And her book, Your Brain is a Filthy Liar, which came out in June of this year. If you're listening, it's 2025. In her book, she really digs into how our subconscious programming hijacks our behavior and keeps us looping through the same painful patterns. And you know this well. We all know that very well, right? In this conversation, Bizzie shares her own personal, powerful story from growing up with a parent diagnosed with borderline personality disorder to having a fight club, yes, like the movie, fight club moment in her in college that really cracked open her understanding of reality and self-deception. We get into what it truly means to change, not just to gain insight and awareness, but to rewire the very way we see the world around us, rewire the way that we respond to stress, rewire the way we relate and understand ourselves. We talk about anxiety, burnout, ADHD, parenting, all the things, and how most of what we've been taught about healing might be backwards. So Bizzie's work is rigorous. Frankly, it's life-changing. I told her, I said, I need the break method. So I entered this conversation so open and so curious about her work because I really think it's groundbreaking. And if you've ever found yourself stuck in behaviors that you know aren't good for you, you know they aren't helpful for you, you know they don't serve you, but you haven't known how to change, and you've tried a lot of things, like you've been through therapy or you've had a coach and you've tried a lot of different modalities. This episode is going to open your eyes to something, to another possibility. It's really going to shake something loose for you. And I am so excited that you get to hear this conversation with Bizzie Gold. Here it is. Bizzie, it is such a pleasure to have you on the podcast. I am very much looking forward to our conversation and all that you have to share with our listeners.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So Bizzie, let's start with your journey, your story. What led you to do this work and to creating Break Method?
I think, as with many people who find themselves either in a position of being an inventor or a creator, if you look back at your earliest years of your life, you can actually see this little thumbprint all over different parts of your life. So I've been asked that question quite a bit lately, so I've had some time to really think my way through this. And I do think from my very earliest ages, I already was thinking about deep existential questions that most likely my peers were not thinking about. This certainly led me down the road of having really bad panic attacks for many years also because little kids are not supposed to be thinking about these sort of deep existential crises. But I think from a very young age, I just naturally was thinking about patterns in the world, trying to understand human beings, what drives human behavior, and essentially looking at the world more like a matrix problem and trying
Mhm.
to understand and even at those young ages, even learn how to predict outcomes and behavior in my parents. My mom had, well, she was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder when I was probably in middle school time frame, but I knew something was wrong pretty much immediately. By the time she had my little sister, I was about 3, and at that age, things had already escalated so much that I obviously didn't know the word gaslighting, but I knew that my mom's version of reality and mine were not something that could be co-reconciled. So I just had to get really quiet and learn how to placate her and just not step on landmines and find subtle ways to try to not let her get set off or even take care of her if I felt like she was making an immature or incorrect decision. And I vaguely remember in those moments having these I can think of like a couple one-offs. I don't remember if this was like who I was all the time, but I remember these little one-offs of having that awareness of an adult, even at those young ages, knowing like I can't trust my mom's decision making. She doesn't have good judgment. She needs me
Mhm.
to help her so that something bad doesn't happen to my sister. So I think all of that definitely start to set the stage for who I eventually became in my career. I had a couple other epiphanies or paradigm shifts in my life that certainly brought me here as well. One of them I actually talk about in the forward of my book was watching the movie Fight Club.
Mm.
And when I was watching this movie, in the very end, when all the buildings are exploding, you have this aha moment that, in fact, the two characters that you've been watching the whole movie are actually just one person, and they are not, in fact, two separate people.
Yeah.
This was my first realization that somebody could be struggling with mental illness and be completely blissfully unaware of it. So their perception of reality could be so distorted and fractured, and they could feel so secure in it that they would have no idea that what they're saying to other people is not at all based on objective reality. So when I had this experience in the movie, I actually started to find some empathy for my mom instead of just being mad at her or resentful at the hand of cards that I had been dealt. And I realized she wasn't just punking me for 13 years. She really had no idea that she was this deep in self-deception. And when I left this movie, I had about a week-long existential crisis in my dorm. At the time, I was at boarding school. And of course, if you're aware and you're already, I've already kind of described the things that I naturally was thinking about as a child. So then you have to face this question, well, if I was crazy, would I know it? Like, could I possibly be crazy? And at this point, I started to really think about, like, well, what is reality? And how does somebody know the line between objective reality and distortion? So during this whole week, I kind of unraveled and was thinking in a much more multidimensional perspective about questions that I'd already been asking for years. And eventually, I arrived on the other side, determined to understand what self-deception was, how
Mm.
somebody can be in such deep distortion that they have no idea that their reality is distorted, and how to effectively help somebody learn to observe it and dismantle that entire system. So I've been on that journey for a very long time. I turned 40 this year. So I've been pursuing the answers to these questions for many years. And from roughly 2014 to present, I've been pulling this thread that is break method and brain pattern mapping and following the breadcrumbs along the way. And I think when we look at people who have invented things over time, where you create from nothing. You're not learning something in school and then taking a slight pivot. You're literally creating something out of nothing, something completely novel and brand new. What ends up happening typically is that you're receiving these breadcrumbs or these pieces. And if you have self-trust and you take committed action, you start to build these pieces. And often you don't know how the pieces are all interconnected with each other until a later point. And I think this is a realization that I had in 2022 that I had been building all these different parts of an engine, but I didn't know how they were all interconnected. And then
Mm.
one day in 2022, I was giving my son a bottle on the couch, and I literally, it was like something clicked, and I actually saw how all of the pieces actually were building this engine that was all interconnected. And I remember just kind of like my eyes were huge, and I was like, honey, take the baby. I need to go get my computer. And it was like, even though I had been doing this work for 11 years, I was so close to certain pieces of it that I couldn't step back and change perspectives to see how they were all interconnected. And that all just literally happened in like one instance in 2022. And that was where I started to build out the technology platform and the whole behavior prediction model because I actually saw that what I had been doing essentially for 11 years was synthesizing an algorithm.
Hmm. Hmm. So let's talk about, we're going to get more into the break method or break method. I want to share more about your book because I think this is important for people to understand. Your book is called Your Brain is a Filthy Liar, which I love. I love this title. And what do you mean in your words? Like, what do you mean by your brain is a filthy liar? And how does it really challenge what we've been taught to think about when it comes to personal development and mental health?
The book is called Your Brain is a Filthy Liar because every single person on planet Earth experiences a unique system of self-deception that most of us are completely unaware of. And it's tied into and connected to formulas that we build in our early childhood years that create this closed system where we feel completely justified or rational in repeating behaviors that we actually know lead to chaos, conflict, heartbreak. And we can't understand why we keep repeating these moments of pain until we're in the pain. And then we ask ourselves, put up our hands like, why? Why does this keep happening to me? It's not just you out in the ethers listening to this. It's every single person, but we all have a very unique pattern and way that that is carried out. So this book helps break down for each of the five brain pattern types how you uniquely self-deceive, how to actually poke holes in those formulas so that you can actually set yourselves free and start to actually see the error in your thinking because we're all thinking in a very specifically flawed way where our logic is kind of built to keep us in this closed loop and there is a way out of it and that way does not take 10, 11 years of looping in your story and crying over, tissues back and forth with your therapist. It is a much more streamlined process. And I've used this analogy a few times, and I think it really hits home that mental health and psychology outcomes have been treated for a very long time as if there's some sort of phenomenon or art form, when really behavior outcomes are math. And I can't tell you definitively why the mental health establishment has not discovered this or gotten on board with this. I have my own conspiratorial views on this. Um, my sense is it's so obvious and it is so relatively simple to fix that there must be some gatekeeper that does not want this information out there. And I don't think it's a singular person. And I think something as simple as, and I've seen this kind of swirling around on Instagram, but it's a good question. Who essentially prioritized the work of Freud over the work of Adler many, many years ago? Because something like that, it will prime us to think in a certain way. And then if you're going through something like an academic funnel, you are taught here are the boundaries of our paradigm or our department's paradigm, and you don't question it. If you question it, you risk getting ostracized. So we end up kind of pushing people's theories through a meat grinder where we say like your theory has to be somewhat representative of previous theories that have already been accepted, right? They don't want anyone to radically change anything. They actually don't want disruptors at all. They want people to just do these slight pivots that feel safe off of some existing theory that was already approved by people. I
Mhm.
think if you really look back, so much of what Freud did, I think, is largely damaging to the human population. And if the work of Adler had been prioritized over Freud, I do think we'd live in a very different world, just as an example of how one foundational belief can start to kind of spiral into something completely out of control. So I do think that there are people that fundamentally understand some of this. I don't know that anyone has synthesized it together the way I have, or at least that's what I've been told by many therapists and doctors that have taken my training.
Yeah.
I didn't
Wait,
kind of do
wait,
that
Busy. What is
paradigm.
their response when they take your training? What is their response?
So I've had a few different ones that really stand out. One was kind of hilarious. This was at an in-person seminar, and it was a professor from MIT. And at the end of it, her eyes are like huge, and she pulls me aside and she was like, "How did you learn all of this? Wait, don't answer that question. I'm afraid of the answer." And I was like, "Okay." And she's like, "I mean, like, are you an alien?" I know that you couldn't have gotten this from school or a teacher because this doesn't exist, but I also know that you're fundamentally right. And I'm now
Mm,
questioning everything I've ever been taught. So she was
yeah.
like, she wanted to know the answer, but she was afraid to know the answer. And her eyes were just huge. Like she seemed almost afraid of me, but also intrigued simultaneously. So
Mm-hmm.
that's one sort of question that I've gotten or a comment. And then from others, this was probably one of my favorites that I think is just succinct and makes the whole system land. They describe this is a trauma-informed therapist that's had so many years in clinical practice. When she came into break, she described it as an algorithm that synthesizes all pieces of therapy jargon that a therapist would have ever learned. And it exposes all of the flaws in existing theories and modalities. And it actually synthesizes them all together in one system that you can just get to the root of a problem immediately.
Mm,
So I think that probably does a good job of
yeah.
summing it up. I was like, great, I'm going to use that forever now. Thank you.
So Busy. Wait, let's walk back a little bit. You mentioned the five brain pattern types. Can
Mhm.
you walk us through them?
So the language in break is not something that people would understand. So I would be giving you like
Okay.
language in Chinese, and if you
Okay.
don't speak Chinese, it'd be too hard to kind of bridge some of those gaps. But I will say all of the five brain pattern types can be divided into a spectrum. So I
Okay.
want everyone to envision an XY axis where it's divided in half. There's a left side and a right side. Two of the brain pattern types are on the left side, and three of the brain pattern types are on the right side. There are underlying core wounds and beliefs and priorities that each has. And because this is a spectrum, this means that certain qualities can be measured either up or down depending on where they're placed on the spectrum. So essentially, a brain pattern type describes a cluster of behaviors that are similar in presentation, but also similar in how the underlying motivation drives the behavior.
Okay.
So there's something that I talk about in my book called the mirror effect. So you could have a person that's kind of halfway through the left and halfway through the right. They might have very similarly presenting behaviors in the external world, but what actually drives the behaviors underneath the hood is completely different. What they care about is different. How they're interpreting their world is completely different. And part of my work over the last 11 years has been to help therapists understand, whether it's a therapist or it's somebody working in addiction recovery, that in many therapy containers, these two people will be treated like they are the same, but they couldn't
Mm,
actually be more different. And one treatment protocol will work for one of them and it will never work for the other. And there's a reason why. Because they're fundamentally perceiving reality differently. And although their behaviors appear to be similar, they need completely different things at different times to actually rewire. So the mirror effect is something that kind of shows us how presenting behavior clusters will kind of, they will have resonance with the left and right side, but ultimately what they see in the world, how they see themselves in the world, and how they choose priorities from that point is going to be very different. So if we start in the center and we move out to the left, every time we move one hash mark, two hash marks, three hash marks, all the way out to the side, self-trust goes up. We
mm,
also start to see independence go up. So obviously, as you can imagine, the further you get out to the left side, then we have people that are hyper independent.
yeah.
They would much prefer to just do things by themselves. Other people become,
Yeah.
kind of just a pain in the butt. I'm there as well. Um, and you can see where typically on the left-hand side, there was a lack of trust in primary caregivers and a development of self-trust because if you don't know what you're doing and I can't trust you to keep me safe, then I have to kind of grow up faster and learn how to be situationally aware. So one of the things that happens also as you hash out to the left is that situational awareness goes up.
Mm.
You are become good at reading other people, but the more you go to the left, the less you actually care about what they think about you. So
Mm,
you read people and you're good at understanding how people are showing up so that you can kind of bob and weave through your life and keep yourself safe, but you don't ultimately care about what they think about you as you continue to move to the left. So an example, to just give a point of contrast, if somebody's right toward the center, they're not going to be very independent. They're probably, typically the more somebody is toward the center, the more likely they are to be in one relationship and stay in that relationship for a long time. There's a circle in the center of the spectrum that I call the circle of complacency. The circle
mm,
of complacency is where people don't take a lot of risk, and because of that, there's not a lot of reward. So their lives tend to be very repetitive and mundane.
mm,
They typically are that person that could be in a job that they don't really like that much, but they don't really hate it that much, and they could be in that job for 40, 50 years. The further you go to the left, that would never happen because that person would never take that job in the first place. And they probably would have self-sabotaged their relationships long before 30 years was up, you
yeah.
know? So there are these shared characteristics in each of these groups. So the circle of complacency is certainly one of those groups where I tend not to see them in my practice until they are dealing with empty nest or they've been laid off partway through their career unexpectedly, because there needs to be some sort of drastic shift or crisis that makes them realize, oh no, I have problems, because it was like their life was set up in such a white picket fence way before that they didn't realize they had any problems. But
Hmm.
it wasn't that they didn't have any problems, it's just that the problems that they had were able to be masked by stepping into roles like, I'm on the PTA, I'm the best wife, I'm the best mom. So they're able to do all these roles until then one of those roles goes away. And then they're like, I don't know who I am. What do I do
Hmm.
now?
Hmm.
So if you go out to the left, these things are increasingly less true. People are very secure in who they are. And if anything, the further you go out to the left, then you tend to become much more of an in-your-face, dominating, assertive person that can actually really ruffle feathers, because you can go so far to the left that you really don't care what other people think and you just kind of do what you want, right?
Yeah.
So there's a happy medium, a Goldilocks and the three bears here on the left
Yes.
side of the spectrum as well. So situational awareness is another marker that goes up the further you go out to that left side. Typically, people tend to become more career oriented the further you go to the left as well. There is another circle on the very far left where this cluster essentially has too much self-trust and too much situational awareness, and they have isolated themselves away from other people, and they can then start to experience paranoia. If if everything pushes you into hypervigilance and you notice every single thing and like every single body movement, or you're tracking every person that looks like they could have a gun, and you've isolated yourself, you stop knowing what to take action on or not anymore, and you can start to present like you've got some pretty severe mental illness. So that
Mhm.
very far left, that would be their sort of mental illness cluster. Then, if we start at the center and we go out to the right, all those qualities that we just talked about now decrease rather than increase. So, situational awareness continues to go down. What comes up in its place is that people start to get fixated on what others are thinking about them. So, instead of
Mhm.
being aware of my environment, I'm always trying to figure out, what are you thinking about me? What does that eyebrow mean? What does your
Mhm.
voice tone mean about me? So everything's kind of locked into this more self-centered perspective. And as you move to the right, you tend to become more dependent. So it may start more codependent, but eventually, the very far right side of the spectrum, we typically see clients here who are completely dependent, like
Mhm.
won't get a job, can't keep a job, keep leaning on everybody and borrowing money, that kind of thing, where there's no ability to kind of like self-generate and take any sort of responsibility. They just become completely dependent on others. So
Mhm.
that's the furthest right side of the spectrum. Along the way, we have a couple different spots where the majority of personality disorders exist. So, like borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder. So, there's a couple little stops along the way on the right-hand side where we see personality disorders cluster. There is one, the classic narcissist personality can also be on that very far left side as well before you get to paranoia. But the majority of personality disorders actually cluster on the right-hand side. Then the very far right, if you look at the brain pattern spectrum in the book, there's another circle where again we can start to see more of that paranoid, schizophrenic sort of presentation. But in general, with these types on the right, by contrast to the left, where the left, it's like they become paranoid because they're trying to catalog and control everything. The
Yeah.
type on the right, everything is centered around futility. So, like, nothing matters, and they're just in this deep existential crisis. So, they're more likely to become paranoid or disconnected from reality through drug use or just completely checking out from life and experiencing suicidal ideation and things like this. So that's not going to come from too much control. It's coming from just an overall perception that everything is futile and there's no point in anything. So
Okay.
all of the brain pattern types get kind of dropped onto the spectrum. So on the left-hand side, I said there were two. You can basically take that left side, divide it in half, and you've got one pattern and then the other. On the right side, the smallest section of the population is going to be that very far right cluster. It's
Mhm.
overrepresented when I work in the prison system, but it's drastically underrepresented in the general population. So that one's a very small section, and these are actually built out on the spectrum based on a percentage of the population.
Okay. So busy. So now, okay. So now that you've laid that out, which was, I thought it was crystal clear. What do we do with that? Like, because you talk a lot about how awareness isn't enough. Like the insights and you talking to your therapist for 5 years about the same thing is not going to get you to behavioral change or to transform in the way that you may want to. So, where does that leave us?
Most people end up becoming aware of behaviors when they're in a therapy container, right? So maybe it'll take, I think, still far too long to get there, but there are people that become aware of certain behaviors that they have, but awareness of the behavior doesn't at all change the behavior.
Right. That's
So
right.
something that I teach in my work is called the neurocognitive funnel. I look at mental illness as a distorted perception of reality. So if you just scan your room for a second, just like
Yeah.
look around, right?
Mhm.
Anything we look at, our brain is going to see it and try to label it. And for some
Yes.
people, this is more obvious, and some people it's not obvious. So like if I scan my table, I've got my cell phone, I've got a coffee mug that says something wildly inappropriate on it that I can't now
I love
drink because it says
it.
something inappropriate on it. I've got a clicker, I have studio lights, right? Everything I look at, my brain wants to see it and define it. So a good way to look at this is if anyone has ever looked at a picture that becomes really pixelated, right? If we kind of step back, sometimes we're like trying to look, what is that? Or even like a magic eye. Sometimes we have to look at the pixels and we're kind of like trying to squint and figure out like, what is it? What is this that I'm looking at if it's not super clear? Our brain actually sees our world much like pixels, and we don't actually realize how much our brain is actually trying to skip ahead and finish things for us. So it
Mm,
might actually grab a few pixels and then it's already filling in the rest of it for us and being like, this is the color red, this is the color blue. They hate me, they love me.
mm,
These things are not actually typically a very slow, methodical position where we're actually mapping the entire thing. Our brain is grabbing a few pixels and then it's acting on assumption, it's putting in a definition, and then we're acting as if that is objectively true. This is
mhm.
why you can be in a fight with somebody and they're like, I can't believe you said this and this and this. And you're like, wait, hold the tape. What? I didn't say any of that. Even just, this is a great example. Because this happens to my husband and I quite a bit because he can get really stuck in his head. Last night, I went out of my way to be like, hey, honey, is it okay if I take the kids to school in the morning? And he's like, yeah, no problem. Great. Then this morning, I see him like scurrying, trying to get the kids' clothes. Like, come on, guys, we got to get out the door. And I was like, honey, I asked if I could take the kids to school tomorrow. And last night, remember? He was like, I thought you asked if I could take the kids to school. And I was like, no, I said, can I take the kids to school? I mean, like, so yeah, technically I said, can I? But like, I am I. You see what I'm saying? So it was like his brain, for whatever reason, was not really listening to the words coming out of my mouth. And his
Yeah.
brain kind of did this flip and distortion. And whatever was going on in his head in that moment, he left the conversation with, I need to take the kids to school,
Yes.
even though that's not what I said at all.
Mhm.
So example here is the brain is not, we're filtering things out in a very distorted way all the time that many of us are completely unaware of. And it's not intentional, right? We're not like trying to be dishonest, most of us, but we
Yeah.
all lie to ourselves all day long. And we actually can learn to see and spot where our brain is actually distorting our perception of reality. So, perception of reality will become a definition. That definition will then start to form this rule set, which typically sounds like, let's say I saw my coffee mug dangling off my table.
Mhm.
I might see that and be like, I need to get that, right? My brain thought, I need to get that. I need to like lunge to pick up this coffee cup before it spills.
Mhm.
Other people, let's say, let's go right side brain pattern spectrum people, I might be so locked into what is happening here and I want you to like me, so I might not notice that my coffee mug's about to slip off the
Mm.
table. You know what I mean? But for my brain pattern type, I'm like aware of all things at all time,
Yes.
and I wouldn't be able to filter that out where somebody else would not see it at all until the coffee was on the floor.
Wait, Busy, hold on. I have to ask you this question because
Yeah.
I'm thinking of ADHD. And
Yes.
and so I would love your take on how much, see, this is where I'm now, my brain is now I'm spinning, is
Yeah.
how much of that, I mean, now that I'm thinking, I mean, I have a son who has ADHD and
How much of it's brain pattern related?
yes,
100%.
yes.
100%. So
But
there,
okay, go, yeah, yeah, go
no,
ahead.
no, you go, you talk through it.
No, because I'm thinking about when you leave the shoe in the middle of the hallway, like you just leave your shoes, or like you leave the towel in the middle of the bathroom, and it's because you don't even think of it, or um you pass by the 5 Cheerios on the floor in the middle of the kitchen as if you don't see it. But I am like, I'm looking at all the crumbs, I can see everything all the time. How
Yep.
much of this is like, because ADHD also, we've pathologized it so much, and I,
Agreed.
I get that, but it's like, how do we know what it is, Busy? Like, how do we know?
I can tell you exactly what it is right now. So when we do brain pattern mapping, we track 9 distinct markers. The top two, so I'll kind of wrap this neurocognitive funnel up because it'll actually reflect back to this behavior thing that we can then
Okay.
tie to ADHD. So basically, in the very top of this funnel, we have our perception of reality. Our perception of reality starts to become definition, right? How we're defining the pixels that we're seeing in our world. And then
Yes.
our brain creates these rule sets that cause us to take action. This is
Mm.
typically where an assumption becomes a conclusion. By the time we've concluded what this is or what this means, we're now taking action. So our behavior is a byproduct of our perception of reality. So if our perception of reality is altered or distorted in some way, our behavior will follow that. So when
Yes.
you tell somebody, don't do that behavior, do this behavior, but you're not altering how they're seeing reality, it will never work. So
Yes.
just awareness of the behavior itself at the end will just lead somebody to become incredibly frustrated because
Yes.
their brain is actually seeing their environment in a way that has error in it. Until you teach them how to see the error, they won't actually even see the new choice. It'll be completely hidden from them. To your
Mm.
point about the like, why don't they see the Cheerios in the middle of the
Yeah.
floor? Like, why could they walk over the Cheerios and still not feel the Cheerios?
Yes.
Okay. So that's this neurocognitive funnel. Now, starting, we track 9 markers. The top two are the very top, and these are 100% dictating how we perceive reality
Mm.
and how these are kind of tied into our more deeper internalized belief system. So these are going to be 100% thought based. They're not behavior. They are literally just what's happening underneath the hood that is
Mhm.
distorting or twisting our perception of reality.
Mhm.
Then we have 3 markers in the middle that are going to determine how our thoughts actually trigger biochemical responses in a 3-part cycle. So we've got a 3-part emotional addiction cycle that is going to go from origin to protective to adaptive. When we
Mm.
move through this cycle emotionally, what happens? We actually elicit a behavior response. When we
Mhm.
feel something, we typically act. That acting part is the behavior, and the behavior follows a 4-part cycle. So we've got 2, 3, 4.
Mhm.
When we look at these 4, there are very specific behavior markers in a specific order that present like ADHD. So
Mm.
this is what I'm going to tell you. The pattern that you were talking about with ADHD, where they are so unaware of what's happening in their environment that they could like walk right over something, that typically is more of a right side spectrum ADHD pattern. The left side, they might be so laser focused on something, but their problem is that whatever they focus on, it has their entire focus. So if they
Yeah.
get distracted and they shift, they've forgot this stops existing. Whatever like project A was, it doesn't exist for a moment. And we're so laser focused on project B that we can get completely lost in it. We lose all understanding of time, space. We can also be really productive, right? This could be a superpower, but it also could be something that destroys relationships, for
Yes.
example. It could also be something, and it does, that makes it really challenging to succeed in school.
Yes.
unless
Yes.
you are waiting till 2 o'clock in the morning to start a 20-page paper, in which case you're probably going to crush it, right? Because you're
Yes.
like, then you kind of get to drop into this flow state hole. So there are ADHD types that exist on the left and right side, but ultimately ADHD it's a very specific 4-part behavior marker that we would
Mm,
be able to see in 20 minutes, and I would be able to tell you exactly what has to be done to help that child actually learn to oppose those patterns. I've seen kids who have been on ADHD meds for a very long time where the parents are just,
yeah.
beside themselves, do break method, and their kids turn around their behavior in a matter of weeks and they're like, Busy, what? Why doesn't everybody know this? Like, I don't understand. So here's an example of just something really simple because it seems so counter to what the establishment tells
Yes.
you. Right. So a lot of kids with ADHD, what happens? They get fidget spinners, they get put on meds, they get extra time added to things.
Yes.
I know this is going to be so counter. They don't need extra time. They actually need shorter, high intensity time blocks with a timer. So
Mm,
example, because they can't be kind of their brain, if they feel like I have to finish this until it's done, their brain's gonna go into this like I can't keep my attention forever, and then they start
yes.
to get distracted. So instead,
Yes.
with ADHD, you have to do shorter sprints that have very clear incremental goals attached to them, and you actually need somebody to apply pressure. So this whole thing that we're doing with ADHD in the school environment is fundamentally backward and will only perpetuate the problem.
Busy.
I've seen kids totally turn it around.
When you said that, when you said to apply pressure and limit the time, so this is hot off the press. My son, who has ADHD, he had to take a standardized test every year. They do this in school, and they gave him extra time as an accommodation, right?
Yeah.
And but when you get the report, when you as a parent get how they did, and you're they're comparing your kid to the other kids who have ADHD or don't have ADHD, you can
Hmm.
see after each section on the test time spent on this section slash time allotted. And
Hmm.
to your point, my son who got extra time, he spent 20 minutes answering the questions out of 40 minutes allotted. And he rushes because he
Yeah.
rushes, but
Well,
then
because he wants to get it done.
he wants to get it done. And I think giving the more time, now that I'm thinking about it, like he never used more than 20 minutes of the 40-minute plus time he was
So
given.
his bigger problem is the unknown of how long it's going to take to complete a project. So if something's multi-part and he doesn't feel like he can just power through it, that's where he's going to start to
Yeah.
self-sabotage and get distracted
Yes.
and have problems. So there are so many different ways to support this ADHD behavior pattern without medication. Just
Yeah.
honestly, it's I'm sure there's severe cases, but honestly, this is it is a byproduct of parenting inputs in childhood, and the sooner you spot it and the sooner you help your child oppose it, the
Yeah.
faster they learn to outgrow it.
We're busy. So let's talk about this too, because now I'm going. So can we talk about kids with anxiety?
Yeah, we
And
can.
and what about adults who experience like depression and burnout? Like how does your method help them? Whereas, like I've had severe depression and anxiety, and what it was therapy and medication, right? So
Mhm.
how does your method help those situations?
So we work with all of the above, and we've had so many profound experiences with people who have literally tried everything and nothing has worked for intrusive thoughts, suicidal ideation,
Yes.
gender dysphoria. I've worked with a lot of clients with gender dysphoria, OCD, panic attacks,
Yes.
anger, people coming in abusive relationships. I mean, we've worked with literally all of it. There are a couple things that are important to remember here is that really what someone is describing as like anxiety or major depression, it has everything to do with, again, these 4 behavior markers and in what order they are matched with your pattern. So basically, the every top layer informs how we understand the bottom layer. So this is
Mm,
why, like, you can't just look at the behavior for what the behavior is. It's like you have to see what's driving the person underneath to
yes.
understand why the behavior rather than just the behavior.
Yes.
So example would be there are certain brain pattern types that are much more inclined toward depression. And they're inclined toward depression because of how their brain distorts reality and starts to skew things potentially in a more negative or futile way,
Yes.
where maybe their counterparts, like me, for example, I would never be a candidate for depression because my brain skews everything optimistically and I think I can figure everything out. And that leads me to overwhelm and burnout, right? Because I'm not a
Yes.
superhero. So no matter what the issue is, whether it's, binge eating disorder or body dysmorphic disorder, the process for us in break method is always the same. We have to understand what underlying motivations and distortions are driving the behavior and actually rewire all the behaviors at the root of perception of reality. So a
Mm.
lot of that, the process that we do takes between 20 and 24 weeks. It depends on how serious a case is. So I had somebody who had spent at least 10 years in basically a lockdown mental facility after accidentally killing somebody while they were having a psychotic episode.
Oh.
And I was working with this person when they were getting their life back together. They wanted to get custody back of their child and they were trying to kind of reintegrate back into society. And when they first met with our enrollment team, they were like, I don't know, maybe we shouldn't take this person. I was like, no, but give them to me. I got this. And by the end of the program, all of the things that they wanted to accomplish, they had accomplished. And they were like laughing on the final session. They were like, I just can't believe like after everything I've been through, how is it possible? And it's
Mm.
because of the process that we do in break. Everything is a very set structure. I always tell people break is like subjecting yourself to be a rat in a maze. And
Mm.
if you, the rat, know what the scientist is going to do to you, you can actually manipulate, you can circumvent, you can like find
Yes.
subtle ways to actually prevent yourself from experiencing it or to feel victimized or to try to get out of it. Once you are locked and loaded in break, we obviously everyone is very clear on this. Like part of the process is that we are kind of changing out all of these stimuli, and you are going to be intentionally bumping up against things so that we can learn how to map the how the thoughts become actions, and then we can kind of go back and help you understand it from a different perspective and then start to dismantle those language systems that your brain uses, because our brain really functions on systems of language just like your car would run on gasoline. And I think this is largely overlooked in mental health, and the
Mm.
more people are able to just keep talking about their story through their wounded perspective, honestly, the deeper these brain pattern ruts get and the more somebody essentially is experiencing their life through confirmation bias rather than actually
Yes.
learning how to seek and spot the errors so that they can actually free themselves from it. Because that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to like free ourselves from this virus that was placed into our brain and our self-concept at a very early age. And we're trying to restore ourselves back to factory settings
Mm-hmm.
because we're capable of so much, and we come in a truly unique spirit that has a very clear destiny. And more often than not, what happens to us with repetition in our childhood starts to pull us away from those things or makes us turn against our inner knowing, turn against the things that we
Yes.
think we want or we
Yes.
trust about ourselves. So we've got to go back through and systematically restore all of those functions. And meanwhile, you're learning tools, you are actively rewiring through pattern opposition. And what I have found is that by the end, more often than not, people are like, I don't even know how much more I could change. Like, what? How did this even happen? Because we're not having to use willpower. You're not having to force your way through it. And
Yeah.
that's why I think altering the perception of reality level, that's what naturally gives way to new behavior without you having to white knuckle it. When people go read books or they're learning courses and it's just like, here's what to do in the event of XYZ,
Yes.
that's going into your semantic memory. So that is really as helpful as learning history facts in middle school that you will never use. Because
Mm-hmm.
when push comes to shove and you're emotionally activated and you haven't learned how to spot the error in your perception of reality, you're going to do what you always do, even if technically you learned better in a book.
How do you do that rewiring then, right? To get at that root? How do you do that?
So it is a very specific step sequence process that involves, on one hand, extracting data where you the client can't understand what it's being used for, therefore you can't
Ah,
manipulate or lie. So every
okay.
time we're like pulling out data, and then when you get to the next step, then you're learning to reflect back on that data, and then it's like, oh my God, I can't hide from this. So this is like, oh, it's like too exposing. I can't believe I actually said that. Because you couldn't manipulate your way out of it. So it's
Yeah.
always like kind of the first part of it always, the first module is always extracting the data that's relevant so that we can piece together the pattern because most people are so convinced that they know why they are the way they are, but I can tell you it's almost never the fact. It's almost never what actually is the root cause. So I think this is where people can get really
Wait,
deep
Busy,
into
it's
their
not all about your
story.
parents. It's not all about your childhood and your
I
parents.
mean, your parents are giving you the inputs, yes, that do set this brain pattern up, but a lot of the stories about why are not
Yes.
actually that they're not the
Uh,
why. It's usually much more subtle under the radar things that would go totally overlooked by you, and then these stories that you latch onto are really just a red herring. They're a distraction away from what's actually going to help you heal faster.
mhm.
So that data extraction part is really important. Also, the compartmentalization so that you don't understand what we're doing and why. Then you get to look at it like we do all together. And then you're like, oh my God, this is crazy. Then you're starting to understand how these pieces are all interconnected. And for this reason, I have had many clients with borderline personality disorder who classically in mental health are one of the most challenging cases to treat. I have seen them by module 2 even if they've been in complete denial about their diagnosis, suddenly look at me and be like, oh my God, I have borderline. And I'm like, hi, it's going to
Mhm.
be okay because now you can see it. So
Yes.
this means we can change it. Whereas before, they really just felt so deeply victimized that everyone was gaslighting them and they couldn't see the distortion.
Mhm.
So there is this moment that we kind of lovingly call the I'm the a-hole moment that eventually everybody gets to where it's like they are so certain that they are being victimized by everybody. And eventually they're like, oh my God, it's me. I'm partially responsible at a minimum. I'm probably really responsible.
Yeah.
So that's kind of one of the arcs that naturally happens in module 2. Then we start to address the language level that's now tied. So now we're clear on how our brain distorts perception of reality and how it then turns it into language like excuse, justification, rationalization. Then we start the process of actually breaking all of these arguments apart like the best lawyer that ever once was because there's an elegant way to dismantle these arguments where your brain all of a sudden is like, oh my God. And then all of a sudden it literally is like altering your perception where now you can see choices that were previously hidden to you.
Mm.
So now that you can see that choice, it's easier to make that choice. And then when you choose that choice, you're engaging in your environment differently. So now you're actually collecting evidence like, oh my God, when I do that, this good thing happens. I'm going to do more of this.
That,
So
yeah.
little by little, as we're having you move from one facet of your life to another, to another, to another, it's like you're starting to actually experience all this radical change. And then by this point, people in your life are like, oh my God, you've changed so much. Or like, like you're like a totally different person, or like I've seen relationships, I've seen people come in to break happy about getting divorced, and all of a sudden they have that I'm the a-hole moment. And they're like, oh my God, I think maybe I can save my marriage. And I'm like, great, let's go do that. By the
Yeah.
end of the program, they're living back with their husband again, and their marriage is great. So
Mm.
it's just this very step sequenced process where everything is very intentional. Every moment that hurts is intentional. Every moment
Yeah.
that feels like a little bit of a fracture to your current state of reality, it's all intentional. And by the time you get to the end, you've changed so much that for many people, it's hard to imagine that there's even more to do. But really, that last phase for us in module 4, we call the rewire sprint. And this is where
Mhm.
you're taking all of those things and you're making sure that you're laying the foundation to make all of these new things that you've been able to do become your new baseline. And that's a factor of repetition and consistency. So for 30 days, it's like you are sprinting hard at all of these new things that you've done
Wow.
so that by the end of that, you are a sustainably changed person.
Wait, so busy. So what about, I mean, you talked about this a bit. What about people who they get so hyper focused on their story in terms of their identity? Like their the way that they feel like they've been wronged or their challenges or struggles they faced or how they see things becomes their identity and they hold on to that as like this is who I am, right? Like
Yeah,
people
all
who
all of that with break gets completely broken apart and restructured.
wait so
And
busy.
and
How do
those
you
clients do have a hard time,
yes.
but they do it.
They do it. Okay.
They
How
do it.
would you define identity?
How would I define identity?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just curious.
So I think of I all things essentially like identity, personality traits, communication style, all of these are essentially coming still through the filter of brain pattern type. So your brain pattern
Yeah.
type, I like to look at like a light bulb, and then we've got all these kind of layers on top of it. So
Mhm.
your identity is still very much a byproduct of your foundational brain pattern type. So
Mhm.
what you're describing would be a right side brain pattern spectrum person.
Yep.
Obviously, there's variance there, but what you're describing is 100% a right side
Okay.
spectrum person. And they do get very connected or codependently attached with their story. What honestly happens on this right side is that in general, there is some sort of parenting input that allows the child to remain self-centered, and it's often things are like too good or too easy, or they're enabled or spoon-fed, or self-efficacy is not generated, and their parents are always trying to help them with things. This honestly has a negative outcome, and I
Mhm.
think this is one of
Yep.
the hardest things for people to face coming through my work is that in many cases, the people that have the parents that are still married, that like went to every single game, they honestly have worse outcomes than the people on the left who had absolutely nightmarish childhoods that are like thriving as entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
So it's a tough pill
Yeah.
for people to swallow. And I'm certainly not saying like go get divorced and
No,
destroy
I
your
know.
kids'
No, I know.
lives. I'm not saying that.
I know.
But one of the things that we do focus on at the end of break is, you know, praise God if you're in a marriage that's still intact and you guys are a united front and all of that. How can you still give your children the inputs that they need to ensure that they do not end up on the right side of the spectrum? Because it requires very specific inputs to make sure that they don't.
Mm.
So I think herein lies the question about this person that's kind of latched onto their story. They are the more likely candidates to be labeled with personality disorders, right? So that's why kind of we described that there's kind
Okay.
of this like cluster of personality disorders on the right. They're typically more resistant to being able to see someone else's perspective. So
Mhm.
in that way, they're going to experience higher levels of cognitive dissonance that might actually make them act out in some sort of way, come off as like defensive or aggressive, etc. Again, all kind of part of this personality
Mhm.
disorders cluster.
Mhm.
But if you do it the right way, which I think we do in break, it breaks apart in this very incremental way, which is why eventually even people with borderline who have previously been in denial about their label have that same I'm the a-hole moment and they're like, "Oh my God, it is me. I do like this is really happening."
Yeah.
And I call this moment reality vertigo, and this will happen for everybody. Once you really see the error for the first time, you have to then basically look back and reflect on everything you've ever done through that sort of error-filled lens.
Oh.
And it does make you feel this temporary like recoil, regret, remorse, shame, where it's like, oh my God, how could I have done that and not known it? And it can feel temporarily destabilizing. We work very hard on actually propelling clients through this place so that they can stay in momentum. But the person that you're talking about here, they're going to have a harder time with that moment, but we would know that already because we know their brain pattern type from the very beginning that they come into
Yep.
the program. So we would
Yep.
already know how to nurture that appropriately.
Okay. Okay. And then busy this question of I'm just thinking of the different questions that listeners might have. So a listener may say, okay, I do break and I feel like a changed person. Does that mean things that used to quote unquote trigger me won't trigger me anymore?
Oh
And I'm
yeah,
less reactive?
you'll actually be excited about your triggers. I always tell people that at
Wait,
the end
what?
of break,
I'm excited
yeah,
about
I always tell people at the end of break, you actually start to get excited when you find a new trigger because it's just like another thing to conquer and go to battle because you can
Oh,
actually overcome anything.
oh, I love that. Okay. I love this. I love this conversation. Whoever,
And to bring it
yeah,
back to the book real quick,
yes,
in
yes.
the book, I call these areas rebellion zones. So once you understand what your brain pattern type is, I show you exactly where we're going to intentionally face your triggers and how we're going to address the systems of language that are either making you avoid that trigger or engage that trigger in a way that's not benefiting you. And
Okay.
I give you a very tactical explanation of exactly what to do to go into your rebellion zone to rewire.
Okay. So the book versus kind of doing break, actually doing the method,
Mhm.
how do they differ? Like if I do the book versus how do they differ? What will my experience be? Obviously reading the book is not.
So I would love to say that the book is like a cheat sheet, but hold on a second.
Yeah.
She's not a cheat
Oh
sheet.
no, she's not. No, she's
She's
no,
not a
she is
cheat sheet.
she is
She's
she's
not a
very
quickie.
robust.
She's robust. She could double as a kettlebell if you were just missing a kettlebell. So here's what I'll say. All of our practitioners that get trained by us, so people that come into our certification that either want to work for us or use this method in their
Yeah.
own therapy practice, they all have to read this book because this is like a textbook of the
I
entire
see.
program, and it also is indexed. So let's say you know your brain pattern type and you're stuck on something, you literally can go to this and like find a get out of jail free card. Okay, how do I
Yes.
solve this exact problem? So
Okay.
my suggestion is, even if people are in the program, this is still a great companion book to have with you because in many
Okay.
ways, like there are narrative portions of the book and all of that, but in general, I would say it's 90% textbook indexed and then 10% narrative. So the narrative's kind of woven throughout,
Love
but it's mainly something that you're going to want to go back and refer to all the time. If you have clients, you're going to want to go back. You're going to have this thing highlighted like crazy.
that.
So I think no matter what, doing something by yourself is never going to generate the same results as doing it with somebody, where
Yep.
somebody can actually kind of call you out or say, "Hey, I think here's an issue that I keep seeing. I think we need to find a workaround for this." So you're much more likely to heal faster in the program where people are engaging with you in the work.
Yes. Yes.
I would still recommend getting this to have on the side, but for now, if the book is the only place you can start, I I think you should at least start here. So whether
Okay.
it's the book or the program, my sense is that most people find the book so exciting that they're like, "Oh my God, this is it."
Yes.
At a minimum, you're going to want to do a brain pattern map so that you understand what portions of the book are relevant to you,
Mhm.
because it is broken up by pattern type. So I think there's no way for me to condense something that takes 4 to 5 months ever into a book,
Yeah.
especially because it's going to be missing that one-on-one aspect.
Mhm.
But if the book is all you can do for now, start there, start somewhere.
And I will throw the link to the book in the show notes because I need everyone to go get the book. And I'm talking to all of you who talk to me about all the things you struggle with and all the challenges you feel like you're facing and how, there is no other way to do life the way that you do it. Like, please, like get this book.
Please.
Um, and connect with Bizzie. I will throw all those links in the show notes. Bizzie, where else can people find you?
You can find me on busygold.com or breakmethod.com. And then I'm very active on Instagram. So that's just at busygold. And we do work with individuals, couples, and families. And then we also train and certify therapists and coaches as well in the methodology.
Oh, amazing. I mean, I may do this myself. Now that I'm thinking about it, after years of therapy and all the things, Busy, you're actually speaking straight to me and speaking my language. So
Good.
I'm excited to dig deeper, and I hope people that are listening really do dig deeper and do this work. I think what you're doing is groundbreaking, which is part of the reason why I really wanted to talk to you. And I just think that sometimes you're right, like the establishment isn't open to like a real challenge to how we've done
Mhm.
things because it's really scary. But this seems to be this could change so many people's lives.
I know, that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, this is like a true game changer. So one, I mean, thank you for doing this work and thank you for in the like true entrepreneurial sense, like really expansive thinking and outside of the box thinking. And like we just need more of this generally. So thank you for your work. I do think obviously it has changed lives, but it will change more lives. And I'm looking forward to doing it too. So
Awesome.
this is gonna be great. And Busy, I'll throw all the links in the show notes. Anyone listening, you'll have all the info there, but please follow Busy on Instagram, go to her website, go to Break Method website, and really dig into this because I think you're going to find it incredibly beneficial and valuable. So thank you so much, Busy,
Thank
for
you.
sharing your story and for sharing all this information. I know listeners are locked in, so thank you so much.
Thank you.